So Genius Jam is a process that I teach that helps you move from doing things that are in your zone of low return to getting to your zone of genius and then unlocking your zones of opportunity. And so Zone of Genius itself is actually a framework that I learned from Gay Hendricks 3 years ago at a point where I was personally burnt out and I needed to ask some real honest questions of myself and really dig deeper into how I best show up and what my actual zone of genius is. And so there's 4 components to that, but there's actually 6 components to getting to your Genius Jam. That's understanding what your zone of genius is and then literally spreading it all over every single thing that you do. And so the 4 components are your zone of incompetence, your zone of competence, your zone of excellence, and then your zone of genius. And so your zone of incompetence is actually all the things that you do that you literally have no business doing. Like, if I'm really honest, you suck at these things, but they end up on your to-do list, they end up consuming your time, and they consume your life anyways. And so it's about getting very honest with what are the things that I ultimately are not good at. Throughout our entire lives, especially in our education system, we've actually been taught to work on the things that we're not that great at so that we can have a level of comfort and understanding, and that's actually the opposite. The things that you suck at, you need to literally get rid of because you're not good at it. You don't want to perfect it. You don't want to master it. It's in your zone of incompetence. Your zone of competence is you actually know how to do these things. Where in zone of incompetence, you don't know how to do these things, but for some reason they consume your time, they frustrate you. So your zone of competence is you know how to do these things. You have a level of competence in it. But there are so many things that you should be doing, you rather do than do those tasks or do those things. And so write down what is in your zone of incompetence box, what is in your zone of competence. Like, you know how to do these things. People may ask you to do them, but you honestly rather poke your eye out than work on these things, work on these tasks. What are they? And then your zone of excellence is you actually do know how to do this. You're actually excellent at it. You're really good at doing these things. People come to you, you probably make some really good income, you probably have a really amazing check that you get from your career, but there's this internal itch that you have or tension in your body that said, am I being the best steward of my gifts here? Your zone of excellence box is also your zone of comfort. You're really comfortable here. You can live and die in this box, but there's something that's telling you that you're not being the best steward of your gifts and that there are new levels with your name on it if you move yourself from feeling comfortable to saying, there's something else that I should be doing. There's a bigger calling on myself, my talents, and your gifts. And if you ask yourself, am I being the best steward of my gifts in this box? And you cannot answer yes, you are definitely in your zone of excellence box. You are not in your zone of genius box. Your zone of genius box is you actually saying, definitively, I'm the best in the world at what I do. That's a comfort and a confidence that you have. That is where you exude your extraordinary talents and innate abilities. It is also that box when people say, I'm flowing and I'm in the flow and I don't feel like working. As cheesy as I thought that sounded over the years, it's definitely you being in your zone of genius box. And so we expect genius level activity and output from everyone else around us, and oftentimes we don't expect it from ourselves. Why? Because when we hear expert and we hear genius, we don't realize that the best experts and the best geniuses are all lifelong learners. You do not know everything, and you will not know everything within that box for you to have genius level activity and output and being in that, working and living and playing as in your zone of genius. The other part is hey, if I needed to go get brain surgery next week, right? And if I go to a brain surgeon and say hey, I need you to cut into my head. I need you to do some of the most important work possible in my body, on my body. And they're just it's in my zone of competence. I know how to do it, but I'm really not that great at it. You would be get the heck away from me. Because you would want that person to believe in their heart of hearts that they are the most qualified person to do the most important work on you. And so if we expect genius level activity and confidence from other people, we should also expect it from ourselves. And so getting to your zone of genius is being able to say, this is what I excel at. This is what I'm going to have the highest output. And this is also where I'm going to have the highest income potential because I'm being very honest with myself about the value that I provide to other people. And so your genius, once you realize what that is, and for me, it's being a solutions-driven communicator. When I speak and when I work on things to solve problems. I can communicate solutions. And my zone of genius shows up in the exact same thing, in the exact same way in every single thing that I do. And so I can do multiple things, but my genius, my level of value into that team, that organization, that company shows up the exact same way as a solutions-driven communicator. And so once you write down all the things in your zone of genius box, look for the commonality. That becomes the glue, that becomes a clue as well to what your zone of genius actually is. And so now that you need to name your genius, and that last step that I talked about, right, is moving from your zone of genius to your zone of opportunity. Because it's not one thing to just know what you're talented at or what your gifts at or what your genius is, but you have to give your genius a destination. Otherwise, you just know it, but it doesn't have any output and outcomes for you that lead to the lifestyle that you ultimately want to live or the business that you ultimately want to create and excel at. And so you have to give your genius a destination. Where do you want it to go? What new conversations do you want it to have? What new team members do you want to attract to your company or your organization as a result of your genius showing up? What new food do you want to eat as a result of you living in your genius and your genius showing up? How much money do you want to make? What lifestyle do you want to have? Where do you want to vacation? These are questions that you start asking because the quality of your questions determine the quality of your life. But in order to get into your zone of genius, and once you get there, you then need to tell your genius where you ultimately want it to take you. And so the first two steps is you getting rid of things that are in your zone of low return. You get little to no return for the time, the energy, the resources, or the dollars that you allocate toward those tasks. And then figuring out what your zone of excellence is to lead you to what your zone of genius is. And once you identify what your zone of genius is, then you start unlocking your zone of genius opportunities. If you feel like you need help finding your zone of genius, then click the link in my bio and let's get started today.